Story time. So, as I walk through this little world, well, actually it's big, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that happened 13 years ago. Right now it is March 11th, and what happened was, of course, the big earthquake in Japan. It was 9.0, one of the largest earthquakes in recorded history. And yeah, I was there. I was there when it happened, and I was at work when it happened. And it was quite the experience. Absolutely something I'd never experienced before. So, I like to talk about what happened. So, I was at work. I was in a class with one student. That class was usually just one student. And it was 2:46 p.m., just 4 minutes until the end of the class, and things started shaking. And boy, did it ever shake. It shook so much that, well, I immediately opened the classroom door, and we walked, or I should say stumbled out of the room. We were on the 4th floor of a fairly old building, so things were shaking a lot. And we encountered, of course, a couple of students that were waiting for the next class, which didn't happen, needless to say. And, of course, coworkers. So there were a couple of other teachers there. And of course, the manager. And we spent our time trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? We're in a building that is older, and to be fair, it's actually quite safe, but with the fact that we had an earthquake that reported to be 7.9 later that day, ended up being revised to 9.1. I believe they've settled on 9.0 as the readings became more precise. But we probably did what we weren't supposed to do, and that is leave the building. We evacuated. There, of course, are elevators, but we walked down the stairs, and one of my next students was in her 80s, and yeah, it was slow going down the stairs. So once that was all done and all the shaking was done, we actually went back in the building. And, well, I should say that there were aftershocks throughout the day, and one time we actually left the building again. But we had another student coming who had taken the train, and we're like, we don't know what's going on. It's probably not the best thing to actually conduct classes right now, because it is what happens when an aftershock comes, and it's quite possible for an aftershock to be bigger than the original earthquake. And so the rest of the day no one came. One person came just because, well, they happened to be walking to the school, and yeah, my students, we didn't have a class. We just said, go home, which is probably the best thing. But anyways, all the trains had stopped, and obviously, I should mention that I was in the Tokyo area. Specifically, I was in Yokohama, and the earthquake was off the northeast coast of Japan. And so, during this time, while we're waiting to figure out what's going on, because we weren't hearing anything from head office, I was trying to text people and explain what's going on, and I couldn't get anything out. Couldn't call anyone. All the phone lines were so busy. You just couldn't get anything. And yeah, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll look at Facebook from my phone. And I had an iPhone at that time. And that was the best thing to do. I was able to get data still. Not texting, not phone calling, but I was able to get onto the internet, and I was able to send emails from my email account. I was able to go on Facebook and let people know what happened and say, hey, I'm safe, I'm fine. I know you've heard something about this earthquake that happened. I'm fine. It's been really, really shaky and, quite frankly, pretty scary, but I'm fine. And, of course, people were glad that I was able to let them know. And, of course, every year I'm reminded on Facebook about this earthquake. And so we spent much of the day watching the news. We were able to watch, I think, NHK, which is... in the UK, there's BBC. In Canada, there's CBC. It's kind of like that. It's government-run news. So we were able to get information about what's going on. And, of course, the fun part was not everyone knew what was going on. And so what I ended up doing, I believe it was the next day, I signed up for Twitter because that was when I first went on Twitter, and I found that was the fastest way to get information about what's happening. Absolutely the best way. But that day of the earthquake, of course, I wasn't on it, and we were just relying on the news and everything. And that's when we were watching the news on the computer, and we heard about the tsunami coming. Like, this is minutes after the earthquake, of course. And as we watched, we saw live video of what is probably one of the scariest things I've ever seen. And all the cars and people being washed away. Thousands of people dying. That was... It's hard to describe what you see. And yeah, so it was a very interesting time that day. Of course, all the trains were stopped. We were given notice from head office that we are to shut down for the day. And we ended up being shut down for several days because, well, we were in an emergency situation. But I'll get to that in a moment. Let's go chronologically, why don't we? So, we were waiting for quite some time. And then a teacher from a nearby kids' school. We taught adults and children. But from the nearby kids' school, they said that they had a family member who was picking them up. They were in a minivan. They said, we can pick you up and drive you home. The direction that they were going was not exactly where I lived. So I just decided, okay, maybe I'll wait and see if the trains start up. And they did, thankfully. I was able to take the train, and I arrived at the train, my home train station, around the same time my then fiance, now wife, arrived home. She had walked in darkness. Might I add that we had a blackout because guess what? The nuclear power plants that had the meltdown, that's where our power came from. Yes. So luckily where I was working, we didn't have a power outage at all because we were right next to a power substation. And they were not going to shut that off because it runs like emergency stuff, you know. Those things continue running, but yeah, so I was able to have light the entire time until going home. So once the train started running, I was able to get on the train. Very crowded. got to my home station, my wife had walked for 3 hours from her workplace. And she had to walk in darkness. Like, the only lights that she could see were cars. Street lights were all off. And we walked home from the station. Of course, you couldn't see any damage. We're a fair distance away from the epicenter. However, when we finally arrived at our apartment, several minutes, well, close to half an hour later, we, of course, we were worried about the dog. He was fine. He was also deaf. But when we got inside, we had a lot of sliding doors. They were open. One of the lamps was, the ceiling lamps was hanging at an angle. And yeah, we had no power. And so we're like wondering, okay, what do we do? Power did eventually come on, and there was a nearby 24-hour restaurant. We decided to go there and eat dinner. And that's when we later learned, the next day, I think, that we wouldn't have any work for the... Well, I wouldn't. My wife still had... Oh, the store she was working in was a mess, though. We had... I had a few days off. And there wasn't much I could do. I couldn't really go anywhere because there's no point in going anywhere. They advise people not to go anywhere. Just stay home and stay around home. The thing is, a lot of people started going to stores and panic buying. And you know what was the number one thing? Toilet paper. Because it turns out that the supply chains were interrupted quite badly. And this also resulted in a lack of gas being delivered to gas stations. And so they said only emergency vehicles and public transportation were allowed to get gas. So if you have a car, do not drive it. And the supply chains for the supermarkets also interrupted. There was a shortage of pretty much everything. And I took pictures of the shelves in the supermarket. Most of them were empty after 2 or 3 days. People were panic buying. There was even a person who decided to buy like 30 toothbrushes. I mean, why does someone need to buy 30 toothbrushes? That's just stupid. And but we found out that the only way we could get a reliable supply of food was restaurants. So we ate out every single day because we couldn't get anything else. Luckily, we had a really good yakiniku restaurant nearby, and so we did eat there a couple times. We did get another earthquake while we were eating there. Whoa, what's with all the creepers? And the 24-hour restaurant we even went to late at night. But they were still getting food because they were able to offer this service. They had a different supply chain than the supermarkets. A lot of the vehicles were cut off from the Tokyo area, and it was difficult to get anything. We even had to but my wife's coworker had extra toilet paper, so we got some from them. But things slowly started getting back to normal. I shouldn't say they were very normal because we had rolling blackouts or brownouts. And occasionally we did have a brownout, but not often at all. People were good about conserving power, which was very, very good. The thing that was interesting is a lack of panic. And that has a lot to do with the fact that people in Japan are used to earthquakes. But, well, behavior-wise, lack of panic, but people were still panic buying. No looting, nothing like that. But after watching a lot of the videos of what happened, of course the tsunami, but in the city that I was working in, and I had lived there before, there was liquefaction in some places. You could see these cracks opening up in the... There was a park by the ocean, and that was interesting. Downtown Yokohama, there was not liquefaction, but the main roads were cracked. And of course, we had the nuclear power plant meltdown. 2 of them there was an issue with. One of them is they're still dealing with it. So yes, radiation did leak out into the ocean, but it's in... I should say that the half-life of the materials that leaked out is very short, so the radiation dispersed quickly. A lot of people were posting things on the internet saying, this is the path of the radiation across the ocean, and no, actually the map that they were showing was the path of the waves from the earthquake, because there was tsunami around the Pacific Ocean, reached everywhere, but much smaller than what hit Japan. But things like Fox News and conspiracy theorists held on to the belief that this was the radiation path. Sorry, but it's not. Radiation dispersed, or I should say, because of the half-life, the radiation was pretty much less than regular background radiation by the time it would have reached other shores or other countries. So that was one thing that I hated, the disinformation. And people were advising me to leave the country. I'm like, no. I'm living here. I have work. I have... Well, for one thing, it's kind of difficult when you got a fiance, and it's like you just don't want to leave the person who is going to be your family, right? Yeah. So that is something that I was refusing to do. I wasn't panicking. The French government was, although it was quite needless. But yeah. How long did it take to go back to normal? We had aftershocks for weeks and months. The brownouts happened for about, I can't remember exactly, maybe 6 weeks or so. And a lot of old coal power plants were fired up again to deal with the nuclear power. I should say that the nuclear power plants around the country were shut down during this. But they were mostly restarted because, you know what? Nuclear power is not that dangerous. One of the problems with the power plants that were damaged is that they were not being maintained properly. They were fairly old as well. And the Japanese government was trying to hide this from people, and it came out that, yeah, there were issues. They were cutting corners just because money. Not that they weren't making money, it's just that they wanted to maximize profits. So they were cutting corners on maintenance of those power plants. But also, to be fair, they were in the earthquake zone and on the coast. Yeah, so that was an issue with the government that a lot of people had. And yeah, I continued living there for another 5 years before we moved to Canada. And yeah, things are probably, I'd say, back to normal. I mean, as normal as it can be, especially in that area, people have been allowed to go back to their homes. A lot of people lost their homes. Um, in fact, I think a student of ours, they had relatives that were in one of those coastal towns that was almost completely wiped away, but their house was on the top of a hill and was the only one spared in the neighborhood. Now that is luck. And yeah, they went and saw it, and they were absolutely amazed that it survived. Um, I didn't know anyone, at least I didn't teach anyone that had lost family members, so I don't think there was an issue with that. So that was okay. But yeah, it was an experience that I don't want to go through again. Oh, and I should say that because of the earthquakes, there was a heightened um, alertness about Mount Fuji and whether it could erupt because of an earthquake. Because Mount Fuji is not extinct. It last erupted over 300 years ago. And 1700, I believe, is the year that last erupted. And a lot of devastation when it did. And they were quite wary about it. But nothing happened, obviously. But it's still good. But yeah, that is something I just wanted to talk about because it is the anniversary of the earthquake. And something you may not have known about my own experiences. So we got through it fine, but it was absolutely not fun. Definitely not. Earthquakes like that, they don't scare me. No. Small earthquakes don't scare me. I got used to them. But anyways, I don't know. I may talk more about things like this, but I'm mostly going to keep it on topic to Minecraft and YouTube on this channel. But if you like videos like this and those, then please consider subscribing. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.